A very warm welcome to my podcast, brought to you by Michael Glanville Executive Coaching. And today I've got the absolute privilege to be meeting this guy, Andrew Rolf. So Andrew is a self-professed expert in transformation, which I think is a huge, huge word. And we're going to get into what that means for business and what that means for people's success as we get into this. But welcome to the show, Andrew. It's very kind of you to come and join us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So I really do want to start with this word transformation. So I'm fascinated by what you do, how you do it, but also how you kind of change and evolve business really, really quickly to make those kind of changes stick across cultures in organizations. So let's start with that.
Okay, well, transformation's a relatively new word in the business context. I don't think we were calling it transformation 20 years ago. Certainly I wasn't when I was earlier in my career. But really, I'm interested in businesses that want to make some kind of fundamental change. And that's either a change that they have chosen to make or one that is being imposed upon them. So some good examples might be the advent of the internet radically changed the world of retail commerce. You couldn't ignore it. You might have been able to put your head in the sand for a few years, but if you did, you were either going to be behind your competitors or just irrelevant. So that's the bit of transformation I'm interested in. Now, transformation often gets jumbled up with other types of change, which I would see more as continuous improvement. So any company worth its salt is always looking to improve. The idea that if you basically stand still, you're kind of going backwards and effectively in decline. So any businesses have done that for years. They've always innovated. They've always tried to change. I'm interested in transformation, which is really significant changes to your business model, the way that you operate, the way that you make money, the way that you identify and engage with customers, partner with suppliers, the entire model for which underpins your business and generates revenue. So those are the things that I'm interested in. I'm particularly interested in revenue generating businesses. Although many of the things that I look into and I write about and talk about can be used for NGOs and the public sector, both areas that I've worked in, really it's revenue generating, profit generating businesses where transformation is most keenly needed and the benefits can be most obviously seen.
Amazing. So, and you've worked for some big businesses, I think. So,
Yes.
Asda, BAE Systems.
That's right.
Some really huge organisations, and that must be quite daunting a little bit. If you're going in as a single consultant and saying, right, well, I'm going to transform this business
Yes.
with 3,500 staff. What goes through your mind when you first walk through the door? You kind of on day one.
Well, so day one, I actually really enjoy going into new businesses. I get a bit of a kick and a buzz out of seeing new organizations. And what I bring isn't more expertise than they have in their business. I can't tell Asda or BAE Systems how to, what their retail strategy should be or what the next aircraft carrier should look like. But what I can do is help them through the process of change. So I've realized that my expertise is in seeing other organizations and being really acutely tuned to signals that give me an indication about the organization's readiness to change and the likelihood of success. Almost a little bit like a doctor diagnosing a patient. They can identify what the problems are, and they can also talk to you about what treatment is available and what the likelihood of the success of that treatment is going to be. So that's the model that's in my head. I love going into organizations. So just to sort of wind the story back a little bit, when I was a teenager, there was a TV series on, I think it was BBC One or BBC Two, and it was with an industrialist, a guy called Sir John Harvey Jones, who was the former chairman of ICI Chemicals, huge business at the time, FTSE 100 business. And he did a TV series called Troubleshooter, where he would go into organizations, famously organize, lots of household British names like a toy company, Triang. He went into Morgan Cars, which is probably the best remembered one. And he would look at these organizations, walk around the shop floor, look at the way things were done, talk to the people on the shop floor, talk to the management, and then present them with a series of recommendations. And I saw that TV series. I thought, I want to do that job. That really interests me. But you couldn't apply for it. There isn't a job called troubleshooter. You couldn't apply for that. Careers advisors wouldn't know how to get you there. I suppose management consultant might have been the closest thing, but even that wasn't really sort of within my field of vision. So I went and did a degree in electronic engineering. And sort of as I was going through that, I was realizing, well, actually, I'm not that interested in all of the wiring and the circuitry and the chips and all of the things that are inside the piece of kit. I'm interested in the people that use it, the outside, the human factor. And that's what sort of led me into what I started doing in my career, and then more recently looking at transformation and change, because a lot of the projects I've been involved in have really been driven by technology. I talked about those external factors. I remember I'm old enough, as we probably both are, to remember the advent of the internet. But if you think about, the rollout of broadband, the smartphone, social media, now AI, all of these things are really technology that is driving business, and the ones that succeed are the ones that know how to take advantage of it, yet keep that kind of human connection. So. That was a long answer to a short question.
No. It's great, and you touched on AI then, which
Yes.
which I want to get a little bit more into
Yes.
detail when we talk about your book. So Andrew's
Yes.
written a book. We'll talk about that in a second. But you also talked about the sort of start of your career in those early years, and you did tell me a little while ago that you are a fellow DJ.
Yes, it's true.
And is that something you still do? I mean,
Well,
are you a dance music king? What's your passion?
I would love to think that I'm a dance music king. My kids tell me that I'm definitely not.
Bit of dad dancing now.
There's a lot of dad dancing. I put together a lot of playlists on Spotify now where I think, if I was in this situation, what would my set look like? And the DJing thing is interesting, because it's one of those, I don't know if you've ever been in a meeting where you have to sort of introduce yourself and say something that other people might not know about you. That's one of my sort of go-tos. The trouble is that DJing now isn't what it used to be when I was doing it. So when I started, the DJ was basically the person who had the most records and access to some equipment that could play it loudly at a party. That made you a DJ. Now everyone's a DJ, and the advent of the kind of superstar DJ, the sort of DJ as an artiste is now a thing. Back in the day, when I started in the kind of 80s, it was just house parties for your mates. But yeah, I still think there is something that I take from it, and a couple of things actually. The first thing is that the best DJs at a party, and I'm not talking about going to a club and listening, to going to hear like a big name DJ, but the best DJs at a party are the ones who firstly, they can read their audience. They kind of know what the vibe is in the room, and they know how to play records that the audience likes and would dance to, not the records that they like and would dance to by themselves. So you get a lot of people who think they could do a great DJ set, but end up playing all the songs that they sing along to when they're in the car by themselves, which aren't great songs to dance to. And the idea of being a great DJ is you're providing a service to the people in the room. I know this sounds a little bit kind of highfalutin, but that, I think, is the secret to a great DJ. It's having the best records, or having the right records, reading the room and knowing what order to play those records in. And obviously I'm of a vintage where it's a record, right? So it's a piece of 12-inch vinyl, not a Spotify playlist. But yeah, I think those are the things. I've always thought there's a kind of interesting mix between the DJs who are the best DJs aren't necessarily the most gregarious, extrovert, sociable people. I'm a bit of an introvert myself, but they are the people who are really good at reading the room. And reading the room is one of those things, without trying to sort of make too many tenuous connections, but people who can read the room often are people who are good in organisations, good in business, good at sort of spotting opportunities. So that's what I take from it.
Absolutely agree. So I mean, that's the link I was going to make. So in transformation, you're going into a room and understanding where people are at, understanding what the vision of the organisation is, and then helping them to transfer that into a culture to make things happen.
Totally.
I saw you speak at a presentation a few months ago, and one of the things you talked about at that was the timing of transformational change and the pace in which transformational change should happen. So, we talked on the podcast before. A lot of my experience around culture change has been that it's pretty hard work.
It is.
You've really got to focus on it as a leader. But actually, timing is critical, and understanding and taking a deep breath around pace is kind of important. So from your expertise, what would you say to people that were thinking or getting into a transformation mindset now?
So one of the things that really surprises me about transformation is people have such a kind of negative connotation about it. They think it's going to be really hard, it's going to take for ages, and it's going to fail. There's a statistic, sadly a bit of a myth, about the failure of technology transformations, and this 70% figure is quoted, which I think has done a lot of damage and put a lot of people off embracing change. What I want people to really, so in terms of a mindset, I want people to think about the potential opportunity. And this is the bit where they often don't dwell, they don't really sort of wallow in the uncertainty of it in a good way. And I'll explain what I mean by that. The best transformations are ones where there's a really clear vision for what the future is going to look and feel like. And you talked about the challenge of culture change. That's the feel bit, if you like. When you're embarking on a transformation, if you don't have that vision, you can end up being very busy and doing lots of stuff, lots of activities, lots of initiatives, but it doesn't feel like it's all coalescing to the vision, the North Star, the future, whatever it's going to be. And what a lot of leaders tend to forget is that whilst they're totally absorbed in this change and transformation, many of their workforce won't really care two hoots about it. They don't really, they are only with the best will in the world, they are selfishly interested in what it means to them. Is my job safe? Am I going to be in the same team? Will I have the same duties? Will I need to learn new technology? Am I going to be somehow less relevant because I used to know how to use the old technology, but the new technology is a bit of a mystery to me? All of those things are the sorts of things that people will be thinking who are affected by change. Those leading the change need to remember that, because many organizations don't have the luxury of just shutting down their operation while they embark on the change. People still have to keep the lights on, the machinery still has to run, everything still has to happen, things are shipped, all the rest of it. So this idea that you sort of can get everybody on the journey, well, they might not be as invested in it as you would like them to be, and you've got to just sort of live with that. The other thing that I've noticed is that one of the reasons that change programs often fail is because there's a fatigue. It just kind of sets in, and 6 months down the tracks, everyone's a little bit tired, and then the kind of new story isn't quite as new anymore, and they haven't seen any sort of real change or outcome or any difference. And they're just in that kind of messy middle where it sort of, we're talking about it, but nothing's actually happened. So my approach to this has been to try to encourage organizations to slice up the change into more digestible chunks. And then you can kind of run at a bit of change, deliver it, and then move on to the next bit. So if I give you an analogy which might help, many leaders see change and often talk about change actually like they are going to renovate their entire house. They're going to almost knock it down and build from the foundations up. And you hear a lot of references to foundations and building analogies in change, which is kind of useful because it's it's probably the biggest change that most people are familiar with in the workplace. What would be a much better approach is for them to talk about how the overall house will feel, but right now we're just going to renovate the lounge, right? And we'll stick with the lounge, and when we've done the lounge, we're going to step back and have a little consider before we tackle the kitchen. Whereas actually what's in most people's mind is some kind of grand designs type scenario where there's a guy standing in the woods in February and it's raining and he's got his half-finished house and his kids are crying around him and his partner's furious and they've run out of money and it's just a nightmare. And that sort of grand designs feeling is what often ends up influencing the way that people sense change in the workplace. So smaller digestible chunks of change where you can claim a victory. We finished the lounge. Isn't it nice? We're all sat here watching TV and it's better than it was. And you can sort of enjoy that feeling and then consider the next bit. And that then gives people the confidence that we can deliver change, that there is benefit from the change that we have delivered. And we might have learned something from doing that one room that influences how we're going to tackle the next room, or in the case of a business, the next part of our organization. So some businesses, of course, don't have the luxury. Their backs are against the wall. They're struggling to know whether they're going to make the payroll in 2 months' time. Orders are declining. Costs are increasing. You're in that sort of perfect storm, and you've just got to do something. So some change, like the house analogy and the room decoration analogy, that works where you've got a little bit more of a kind of clear window to get things done. But I also work in some businesses which are in quite a bit of distress and they need to do something remedial. We're in an A&E scenario. The patient's been brought in, they're hemorrhaging, and we've got to do something. And if we don't, we haven't got a business.
Interesting.
So knowing what environment you're in and what the reality of the situation is really important. So you asked about those kind of day one situations. Often the preparation that I do going into an organization is quite significant. I'll go through whatever I can find in the public domain. I'll look at their financial position. I'll look at their head count, who they're acquiring, who they've divested, what new products they've launched. It's quite telling if you think about us perhaps a mid-sized business. If there's a news section on their website and there's been no new news posted for the last 6 months, that's usually an indicator to me that there's a bit of a problem somewhere. No new sales announced, no new clients acquired. Those are the kind of things where you think, okay, there's a bit of work to do, and it may not be apparent, but it's not that hard once you've done it a few times to know really what the signals are that you need to be alert to. And this pace thing is really, that's kind of been one of my real areas of focus, is how to quickly assess the business and then do something about it. And when I mean quickly assess the business, we're talking days here, not weeks and months. So many organizations, many consultants would love to come in and say, okay, well, it's going to take us 3 months to do a study here. We've got to interview 100 people. We've got to go to all your sites. Oh, you've got a business in Europe. We need to go and see that as well. You can do it that way, but I often think if you interview double the people, you won't know twice as much. You end up starting to hear the same themes. You need to interview enough people and you need to see enough, but usually within the space of a couple of days, I've got enough information to be able to present something back and have a meaningful discussion about where the leadership wants to take that business and what I see that might be either supporting that vision or could be a huge counterweight to it.
And leadership, so obviously leadership plays a massive role, and our
Yes.
podcast is meeting amazing leaders on their journey to success, and you are one of those. But also you, by the sounds of it, align yourselves in the businesses you go in with some amazing people, and you must have seen some great successes, and you must have seen some big challenges from the point of view of leadership traits and decisions that people make, and the sorts of things they might say to their team in transformation.
Yes.
don't name any names.
No.
But it's great to have a couple of examples of
Yes.
where it's gone really well, but
Yeah.
also where you've seen some leadership traits that perhaps people might want to think twice about if they are going into a transformation process.
So these aren't necessarily leadership traits I'm going to give you. I think they're just traits of good humans. The things that really stand out for me are trust and transparency. The most successful projects that I've delivered have really, everyone in the room has kind of known where everyone else is coming from, and with a fairly radical level of candor and openness. So they will know not only what is each individual being measured on in terms of their KPIs or success metrics. They'll know personally where they want to take their careers. They'll know about their sort of life outside of work. They'll know what gives them a buzz, what makes them tick. They'll know what some of their blind spots are. So this is a level of honesty that many leadership teams actually don't really display, in my opinion. They're better than most employees, if you like, at working together, but that doesn't mean that they're transparent or they have sort of a level of honesty. What they're often doing is working for their function, and the success of their function might be to the detriment of a competitor function. Even the language competitor within that context is a bit weird, but they don't really know how each other ticks and what motivates them. So you get a group of people who are able to work together, but they aren't really able to work beyond that and get into transformation. And transformation, you're going to encounter some tough times. You're going to encounter a lot of uncertainty, and being comfortable with uncertainty requires you to be highly transparent. What are you feeling is not a question that many leadership teams like to talk about openly. What are you doing? Happy to talk about that. What do you think the future holds? What are your opinions on? But what are you feeling right now is not something that many leaders talk openly about. In fact, many of them work quite hard to sort of shut that side down. And what you end up with is quite a sort of transactional, dare I say, a bit robotic sometimes in the way that they deal, particularly with each other, with the discipline of change, and with the people affected by change.
Sounds like they need an executive coach
to
help them on the transformation journey.
It could be. I think one of the roles that we perform with leadership teams is helping to hold a mirror up to that team and say, "This, you may not be aware of it, but this is how you are. This is how you are coming across." That might be okay in these situations, but in these other situations, this is going to work against you. Or when put under pressure, what you think you are doing by stepping in, by taking over the tiller, is actually, demeaning and undermining many of the people who can do that quite well, and maybe even better than you, dare I say. So I think there's a bit of that. The other thing that I've found in the projects that are the game changer projects, and in my career, I mean, I've worked with hundreds of organizations. I can probably count on the fingers of two hands what I'd call the game changers. The game changers have actually been fun. There's actually been a kind of sense of, we're on to something here, we've kind of sniffed out some innovation that we think is going to be a game changer. And it could be technology, the way you work, the processes, the way, whatever it is. And there's a kind of real thirst for it. It's not just like you're passing the baton, which is another phrase I hate in business. This idea of baton passing, like it's a kind of relay team and only one person's can make a difference at a time. You're much more, in fact, I don't really like sporting analogies within the workplace per se, but the idea that you are collectively doing something that is gonna make a difference, and it's more than just make money and make more profit. It's going to be something that you're remembered for. So I don't know. Think about the design team. I wasn't part of this, but think about the design team that was perhaps working on the iPhone. they were people who knew they were going to make a difference. This was going to be a game changer. Or the people who, the sort of early advent of social media, those people like, hang on a minute, we're onto something here. This is kind of growing beyond our wildest expectations. Those are the ones where, I look back on those and think, I was really proud to be involved with that.
And one of the things you mentioned to me is that you spoke on the front of a Navy frigate to the.
Yes.
You must have had some incredible of leadership lessons out of doing that. How did you even get into being able to do that?
So when I was at university, I was sponsored by an electronic company that specialised in radar systems, and obviously on frigates there are lots of radars and various other systems, and the particular group of people that I was involved in, it was a really fascinating project. Basically, it was the air crew of a helicopter that was also on the frigate, and they were involved in anti-submarine warfare, and they had to plan a mission in this kind of cramped control room, and then run down through the ship, get on the helicopter, take off, and sort of detect the submarine within a particular time frame. And the only way whilst we had spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to make this this planning system work, and essentially it was like a laptop, imagine like a ruggedized laptop, until you actually got into the vessel and saw what the aircrew were wearing and what their route through the vessel would be to get to the hangar and get in the helicopter. None of it made sense. We were doing this in an office, in a facility, and it was completely removed from the reality of the situation. And I think that's one of the, when I said earlier I was interested in the people who used the systems, not the kind of electronic circuitry that went into them. That was the bit that really kind of pushed my buttons. I was like, hang on a minute, these guys are all sort of dressed up in their gloves and their mittens, ready to kind of get on a helicopter. They're not going to be able to use this equipment we've designed for them. This is fine for us in our office, but not for them. And so there's quite a few instances I've visited railway maintenance crews in porter cabins on the side of railways, trying to understand why corporate training material that was designed in an office isn't working for these guys. Or when you go to the facility, you know exactly why it's not working. They're not going to sit down and work their way through a manual. They're in a porter cabin in the middle of nowhere. And those kind of things, that really excites me. Seeing that sort of end user environment is fascinating, and that gives you a kind of level of empathy with what in user experience terms we would have called the end user. But that sort of phase of my career, working with designing systems for people, then led into, well, hang on, why are these systems not really working? And often it's the leadership of the organization that has misunderstood what the reality of the situation is. Some of the leaders, don't get me wrong, some of the leaders are highly attuned and have worked in those environments. They were in a porter cabin 20 years ago at the beginning of their career, and they've worked their way up through the sort of corporate ladder. But some haven't. They've transferred in from another organization, and they don't really have a sort of a feel or a sense of what it's like to work at the coal face. So I'm very interested in that environment where in the morning you can be on the shop floor and in the afternoon in the boardroom. And I think that I can transfer between those two worlds quite well. I'm quite good at talking to people. I'm better at listening to people. I'm genuinely curious about what it is they do, and many of the best initiatives I've heard have usually come from people who are very close to the operational reality of things. And they can see within an instant whether an initiative is going to work or not. One of the areas, though, that they're challenged in is the external factors. A regulatory change. Well, that may not be the sort of first thing that a guy in a porter cabin is going to be thinking about. But if the business as a whole doesn't think about it, then there's an issue. Yeah. So those are some of the things. But yeah, I really, like I say, I get a buzz out of going to different places. I've always had a kind of motto of the work that really I want to do is interesting projects with interesting people in interesting places. If I can get all three, that's a really good day in the office for me.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I suppose you're the conduit between, the front of house, or
Yes.
the porter cabin analogy that you used, and the leadership team. But you can go in and be independent without the front of house team perhaps thinking that you're there as the management, as may have been described.
And that's that role is, you have to be quite delicate. It requires a fair degree of diplomacy as to who you are and what you're there for and why you're there. So sometimes you can go to the front of house and you'll just hear a laundry list of every problem they've ever told, and it's like, oh well, you're the 10th consultant we've had. We told the last guy everything and nothing changed. Why should we waste our time with you? Or yeah, okay, we'll go through the list, but nothing's going to change because nothing did before. You get a bit of that, or you get a scenario where the leadership team will almost want to over brief you. Don't talk to this person, do talk to them, make sure you ask this question, please ask all of these, avoid this area completely because it's a total hot potato. That kind of stuff, you have to take a bit of that with a bit of a pinch of salt. I'm there because I've seen probably more transformation projects than they have. I don't want to be sort of big-headed about it, but it's likely that I have seen more transformation.
That's what you do.
Yeah, I've certainly been in. When I added it, about 3 or 4 years ago, I added up how many organisations I've been into, and I've delivered billable projects for over 100. That doesn't even count all of the pitches I've done, the interviews I've done, the things that didn't lead anywhere. So if I add it all up, there's hundreds of organisations. So across lots of different sectors as well. So you mentioned BA Systems and ASDA. I can sort of see patterns and join the dots between organizations that people in those organizations may never have seen. So that's why I'm there, and that's the value I bring. But you don't want to get too big-headed about it. You've got to be quite diplomatic. You are still there. You aren't an expert in their organization. You aren't an expert in their sector. You're an expert in transformation or leadership development. And that specific string to your bow is what could make a difference to their organisation if you can create the conditions.
But they've got to embrace it.
Totally.
As an entire sort of team.
Yeah, and it's quite often that there is hostility. You're not the first person who's turned up. They've been round the loop a couple of times and it hasn't worked. There's been a change of leadership, or a private equity-backed company has maybe sort of made some decisions that have sold off bits of the business. There've been some tough decisions along the way. So you've got to be sensitive to that. But again, you can't make an organization change that doesn't want to. So back to the kind of vision thing, you've got to have something that sounds exciting and sounds like it's going to be fun. Or, put it simpler, the redecorated living room. It's got to be better than the one that you had before. And being able to tell those stories is one of you asked about leadership qualities. I think that's one of the leadership qualities that is a little bit missing at the moment. People who are kind of raconteurs, storytellers, they can craft an image using words and get people to believe it, and do so using words which are general, easily understood, common words, not management consultancy buzzwords and kind of gobbledygook. I really try hard to sort of steer clear of that, because as soon as you start using that language, okay, other people in your industry and in the business of transformation and change might understand it, but it quickly alienates you from the people who are going to be experiencing the change.
So you are the first person on the podcast to have written a book. I know it hasn't been released yet.
Thank you.
But a fantastic thing to do.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about it. Small Yet Mighty, is that right?
That's right, yeah. Small Yet Mighty. And the sort of subtitle is The Disproportionate Power of Small Teams to Make Radical Change. So when I first started writing the book, I thought, well, there's lots of people who are talking about change. I want to share my experience of helping organizations change, what I've seen work and what I've seen which might work in theory, might be great sort of stuff to teach in an MBA course, but doesn't actually work in practice. And the book is really a manual for anybody who wants to consider changing their organization or is in an organization that is being changed and thinks, hang on a minute, it doesn't have to be this hard. Why is it feel like we're wading through treacle? And the book has three components to it. So the first pillar, if you like, is that small teams outperform large teams. There's quite a lot of research that supports this. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But the idea that small teams, and by small, we're talking like 5 people. So, the small teams are outperform large teams. The second bit is that rapid change is more likely to be effective than longer lasting change. So redecorate the lounge, not transform the whole house, start with something that you can measure. And the third bit, which has been, I think is probably the kind of game changer bit of the book, is really when you start your transformation is critical to its success. So you might have got all of the other components correct, everything's good to go, you've done all your groundwork and you're ready to go. But actually, the point in the year when you start is critical, more critical than people realize to the success of the transformation. And that's due to the availability of people, when holidays fall, when there's kind of variations in the season. And I know it sounds silly, but people are ready to change at different times of the year. It's not kind of a surprise that people often think about redecorating their house in the springtime. Well, one of the reasons that you can do that is because you've got the time to do it. People don't tend to redecorate their house in the summertime because they're not there. They've gone on holiday. And they don't tend to redecorate their house unless they have to at Christmas time because there's other things that are occupying their minds and taking their discretionary, taking the money out of their wallet, if you like. So that's the kind of the premise of the book. And the idea was that I don't really read a lot of business books. I read a lot of books, but I'm not that interested in the language of business books. There's a few that I've read that have really been fantastic, but there haven't been many, if I'm honest. And I wanted to write a book for people in businesses that hadn't done MBAs, that weren't sort of hanging out with the big 4 consulting firms every 5 minutes, that weren't listening to every podcast going, obviously this one accepted, but they were people who just wanted lots of practical advice about how to set up a transformation and how to deliver it. And one of the things that I wanted people to feel was that they had a strong chance of succeeding with people who were already in their organization. They didn't need to hire an army of consultants to come in and do this to them. They could get a lot done with the people who were already on the payroll or already sort of within their immediate circle. Some people have described writing a book as a 200-page business card. And there was a bit of that as well. So if I'm honest, I'm a independent consultant, so I'm always talking to people. I'm always looking at what my pipeline looks like. I am a businessman as well as someone who advises businesses. So I wanted something where people could read the book, and if they were interested, they'd know a lot more about me. They wouldn't have to sort of sit through a pitch or a presentation. And they could phone me up and just ask me a question about something to do with the book and get on and do it themselves. I'd be delighted if that happened. But I also thought, well, if they wanted to hire me to help them with something, to in the same way as you and coaching your clients, if they wanted something a little bit more active, a more active engagement, then they could know where I was coming from and what it was that made me tick. And really I wanted to, again, get across to people that change can actually be quite exciting. It can be a fun thing. And we don't hear enough about fun in business. Business, I sense, and I don't know if it's just because of the economic conditions and all of the sort of news that we follow these days, but I do sense that business has got very serious and very heavy, and the perma-crisis that surrounds business at the moment, I find it can be a bit overwhelming, and it sort of takes out the the excitement of business, that sort of innovation and the fun of being in business.
Yeah, no, I can see that. And so in your information about your book, you sort of open with a quote from Mike Tyson. What prompted you with that? Tell us the quote.
So the quote is that, and before I tell you the quote, actually, Mike Tyson is full of amazing quotes. I hadn't realised this, but the man is a kind of living quote machine. He's like a kind of Oscar Wilde of our times. But the quote that he had was that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And I imagine if you've been punched in the face by Mike Tyson, then suddenly you're in survival mode, right? Yeah, you're not. Any strategy you had is gone out the window. But that is often how businesses approach things. They have a plan. They know what the next quarter is going to be. They've got a sales plan for the financial year. They might know what most businesses of any scale probably know what the next 12 to 24 months is going to look like. They probably can't do much to affect the next 12 months. The next 24, they've got that 12 to 24 months is within their gift to change. Beyond that, they haven't. They might tell you they've got a plan, but they haven't really, unless they're like doing pharmaceutical research or building an aircraft carrier, things that take decades. Most businesses are sort of in that sort of 3 to 5 year bit. Everything's quite woolly. So the point about the quote is that actually I think that businesses have, to continue the analogy if you like, businesses have been on the ropes a bit. If you think about all the things we've had in the last decade, we've had Brexit, then we had COVID, we've had war in Ukraine, which has affected energy prices and supply chains. We've had presidential changes in the US and tariffs as a result of that. We've had, thinking more locally, we've had changes in the minimum wage and the national insurance, which actually really affect the bottom line of small businesses. These are the things that affect training budgets and whether you're going to be able to take on a placement student and whether you've got the ability to give your team a pay rise. So I think businesses have really had it tough over the last 10 years. And there are some opportunities. I think that the businesses that are able to harness AI in a way that is sensitive to the human workforce and allows them to really do the things that humans are good at and the things that technology are good at. I think AI has an amazing game-changing potential for organizations, but there's a whole ethical piece about it, which I wouldn't be qualified to speak on. But even just the impact piece, most people in an organization are probably a little bit worried about AI whilst excited about it. But back to the kind of Mike Tyson thing, I think that there isn't a steady state in business. Businesses need to be ready to roll with those punches. And if what you're doing doesn't work, well, you can kind of hang on to that, but sometimes at your peril. Look at the businesses that are in the Fortune 500 or the FTSE 100 that were there 100 years ago, and there aren't many of them. You look at how someone like IBM has changed from making calculating machines, physical hardware, to a computer business, to now actually they don't make laptops anymore. They sold that business off. Now they're a data business and they're a technology business and they're a software business. So, that reinvention is essential. And if you don't, you die. There aren't many businesses that have the luxury of being able to do what they did 100 years ago in the same way that they did it. It's almost inconceivable to find that business. So the punch in the face thing is partly there. Is partly there to kind of wake people up a little bit. Like, you just can't daydream your life away through business. Knowing that the next quarter's secure or the next financial year's secure isn't enough. That's just a year. That's kind of nothing. And if you've got a workforce that depend on you and you need to kind of keep, you need to keep the lights on, and that requires a certain amount of money, well, you can't bank on that. And it's that woolly 2 to 5 year period where organizations aren't thinking at the moment. That's the bit where I think there's a real blind spot. They're good at this year, they're not bad at next year, but anything after that is pretty hazy.
Really interesting. And it's difficult to plan long term in advance. As you said, there's been so much
Yes.
change. No one really knows what the next
No.
the next couple of years is going to bring in
Yes.
terms of change. And that's exciting, but also
Yeah.
can be really, really challenging.
Totally.
So the book sounds fantastic. You heard it here first. Small Yet Mighty, hopefully going to be released in March. So Andrew Rolf, Small Yet Mighty, look out for that one if you're interested in finding out a little bit more about transformation. But we talked earlier on, and you touched on it a second ago, about the evolution of AI and
Yes.
AI systems and the way AI can change and is going to change
Yeah,
business. And I'm speaking at an event in a few weeks' time about the risks in AI, or the thoughts that you might have to go through when considering AI in corporate governance. So
Yes.
what boards might need to be thinking about when analysing data that's being provided by a team that is now using AI, and also putting into those systems potentially sensitive information from businesses. So from a transformation point of view, where do you see, I suppose, the biggest risks from an AI systems point of view being integrated into those businesses?
That's a really interesting question. What I'm seeing at the moment is businesses looking to solve age-old problems using AI. So a good example would be we are trying to sell a product. We're a broker for a particular product, and we have a database of potential clients or former clients, and we want to mine that database to find who are the best potential prospects for the product we're selling. Age-old problem. People have been doing this for decades, and AI is really good at, as you know, quickly being able to sort of parse all that information, spot who are the likely candidates for the best prospects, and maybe find a few outliers, a few people you hadn't thought of. It'll provide you with the usual suspects, but there's a few extra sort of edge cases that might be worth considering if you're in this scenario. Now, the immediate question is, let's say you've got a database with all of these client records. That is not the sort of thing you want to just be running through ChatGPT and sort of like, here's, that is the absolute kind of, no. So you want to be working in a kind of private, protected environment. The real challenge though comes, and I've seen this because quite often, like a member of the leadership team might be sort of 5 or 10 moves ahead of the rest of the organization. I've been doing this on the weekends, I've done this, and here's the report I've compiled. There you go, sales team, go and process that lot. And that in itself can have a lot of unintended consequences. So I think to your question, the bit that leadership teams need to be aware of is they need to kind of run the negative scenarios as well as just the happy path. So the happy path would be, I've run the report, here's all the prospects, go away and phone those people, and happy days, we've sold more product and we've done it more quickly, and maybe we need fewer people to do it because it did it all in such an efficient way. The unintended consequence is all of those people are now dreading Monday morning when the boss comes in and says, here's the list, and I've been busy over the weekend, and their eyes roll and they think, oh my God, here we are being told how to do our jobs again. Or here's a dozen nuances that your prompt didn't know. So you'll see the advent and the rise of prompt engineering as a discipline now. Being the better you can ask ChatGPT or whatever your AI solution is, the better you can ask these questions, the better the output. And you've got to be aware that sometimes it hallucinates, sometimes it will make a mistake. So you can't treat this as sort of the gospel. And that's a very different way of thinking about technology. In the past, we thought that technology was quite black and white. It was right or it was wrong. If it was wrong, we'd done something wrong. We coded it wrongly and we needed to go back and change it, and then we'd get it right. And then you'd run the report for the end of the month, and the number that would come out at the end would be the right number. With the world of AI, we're not in that level of certainty. It can make mistakes. It isn't perfect. It needs to learn. The more inputs and stimuli you provide the model that you're using, the better it's going to be. And businesses need to be aware that the opportunity that's available to them is to craft a model that is unique to the thing that they do. So that requires some effort. Just taking somebody else's model and someone else's prompt, isn't going to work necessarily in your industry, in your sector, with your clients and all of the other things. So I think that leadership teams need to be very aware of that. The obvious thing, the big debate at the moment is which jobs are going to go as a result of AI. And I think that's the wrong debate. That's a kind of winners and losers debate. What I think would be a better discussion is, how is this technology going to reshape the way in which our workforce connects with each other and uses the technology to do the thing that we're already known for? That's a much more interesting debate, and it's then suddenly, as opposed to looking at the entire workforce, in the UK, you're looking at the employee base of your organisation. So in some ways, I've sort of narrowed the field of view. But the thing that you've then got to do is think, well, what are all of the processes that our organisation does? And you'd be surprised, maybe you wouldn't, but some people might be surprised at how many organisations haven't got a clear idea of all of the processes they do. Or we did all this for an accreditation 10 years ago and we've never updated it. Or the person who wrote all those processes is no longer with the business and they had most of it in their head, and now they've gone, actually, we don't know really what our processes are. So I think the key to really successfully adopting AI is to be very clear about, one, what your proposition is. What is it that makes you a brilliant business without all the technology stuff? What is it you do and where do you add value? And then what are all the processes that underpin delivering that service? And if you can think through the lens of processes and then look at AI, then you're cooking on gas. That's when you've got an interesting set of problems to discuss. It will require leadership teams in particular to be super sensitive, probably to go outside of their comfort zone in just how much empathy they need to give to their employee base over this. This is the AI discussion feels very different to the advent of the internet discussion. Advent of the internet felt like, oh, there's a small team over here that's going to work on our e-commerce solution. They're like in the back room, there's an online team. And then eventually it sort of got merged into the main team. Now, I think everyone's thinking, what does this mean for me? Everybody's sort of, it's so prevalent. It's become so prevalent so quickly. Everything that you used, if 10 years ago the expression was, well, just Google it. Now even Google's first set of results are AI generated. Yeah. So that's a real sort of, that takes a while to get your mind around, and we haven't figured out the ethical implications of this in the same way that we might have done in, say, I don't know, the advent. I heard a recent discussion on this, and they were talking about when Dolly the sheep was cloned, there was a big debate about how this technology would be used. Would it ever be used on humans? What were the implications? How would we govern the technology? How would we make sure this didn't get misused? And we haven't had that debate around AI. And I don't know if it's because AI is more of a tech thing than a medical thing. The medical profession and the sort of medical research profession has a lot more ethical guidelines around it than perhaps the technology industry does. But I think that we need to have a debate about the ethics of AI, because it is just moving so quickly. I think if we'd been sat here 3 years ago, this would have been a kind of footnote to our conversation. Really, I see it now being in the realms of transformation and change. I see it as being the top of most leadership teams' agendas, or if not the top, within the top 5. And 2 years ago, it was kind of maybe in the top 10 of the CTO's agenda. now it's on everybody's agenda. So
Yeah, fascinating.
That's where I see it.
It's here now, and
It
that's
is,
that's
totally.
the thing businesses have got to consider and got to look at. So, if you were going to give businesses and viewers and listeners of our podcast a message about transformation, if they're thinking about embarking on a transformation project, or if indeed they're thinking about AI and how that fits into their business, what would that message be?
Probably choose the sort of pillars from the book, because in thinking about that question specifically, that's what resulted in the book. So I would say try to get started thinking about this with a small team. A small team of people, like Jeff Bezos uses the two pizza rule for Amazon teams. Something where you've got a group of 5 people, around 5 people. That's a really good number. The reason it's such a good number is because the individuals in that group have far greater accountability. There's no weak links. You can't kind of like slack off and hope the others are going to pick it up like you might do in a 20-person team. With 5 people, there's kind of nowhere to hide, and that creates really good discipline. The other thing I would say would be to think about that vision. What is it? What is the story that you want to tell that's beyond the things that are within your, say, 12 to 24 month control? So that fuzzy phase 3 years out, what is it you're going to be doing, and what is it going to feel like? And not be too scared that you haven't necessarily got everything bolted down, because it's inevitably going to change. If we were to have this conversation about AI in 2 years ago and again in 2 years' time, the conversation is going to be totally different.
Yeah.
And the same with your change. So don't be for leadership teams specifically, don't be too frightened that things are going to change, and perhaps path A sort of morphed a little bit into a different path. That's kind of okay, so long as you're kind of making progress, and back to the redecorated living room. So long as your team can see that something has changed for the better along that course, it hasn't just been kind of leadership noodling and off-sites and sort of lots of talk and no action. I think if I was to kind of sum it up, the kind of Elvis Presley song, a little less conversation, a little more action, please, is really what I want teams to take away in terms of transformation. They need to be active.
All right, fantastic. Okay, well, that's the end of our podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's been great talking to you.
Absolutely brilliant.
Enjoyed it.
Fascinating stuff. If people that are watching and listening want to contact you, how would they do that? Through LinkedIn?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, so I'm Andrew Rolf on LinkedIn. My business is Cursive Consulting Limited, and yeah, I'd love to talk to people. I'm here. If they want to see excerpts of the book or find out more about the book before it's published, more than happy to share that information too.
Brilliant. So this has been Meeting Amazing Leaders on their journey to success. It's been fantastic. You're amazing. I wish you all the best in whatever next project that you're going to be going on. If you liked our podcast today, then click on our subscribe. You can watch us on YouTube, which would be fantastic. But also, if you want to listen to us, we are available on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. But for now, from Meeting Amazing Leaders on their journey to success, Michael Glanville and Andrew Rolf, we'll see you in the next podcast.